Hey everyone, ready to shift gears a little.
Yeah, we're going deep on a TED Talk today.
One that really makes you think.
It's gotten a ton of attention.
It's all about how to really live your life to the fullest. Personal growth, that kind of thing.
And it's resonated with people all over, it seems.
Yeah, and the speaker lays out these four really clear
I
steps.
call them takeaways.
Yeah, takeaways to help you,
Get
make
them
some changes.
about challenging your assumptions,
Oh, that's a big one.
embracing vulnerability,
Okay, interesting.
redefining what success actually means,
I like that.
and then seeing how even tiny changes you make can ripple outwards.
Okay, so before we get into all that, can you set the scene a little? How does the talk actually start?
Well, the speaker starts off talking about how we all get stuck,
That's stuck.
in routines and our comfort zones, just going through the motions.
Yeah, I feel that.
And the thing is, we often don't even realize we're stuck until something shakes things up and forces us to look at things fresh.
And that's where these four takeaways come in, right?
Exactly. They're like the tools to break out of those ruts.
Okay, let's unpack them. First one, challenging assumptions. Sounds kind of intense. Where do you even begin with that?
Well, the speaker says a lot of us are walking around with these deep down beliefs.
About ourselves.
Yeah, and about the world that are honestly probably limiting us.
Oh, holding us back.
Totally. And we've accepted these truths without even questioning them.
We just sort of inherited them.
From our families or our culture, maybe our past experiences even.
Okay, so how do we know which assumptions to challenge? There's a lot going on in our heads.
That's where it gets interesting. The speaker says, pay attention to the thoughts that make you feel stuck.
Oh, the ones that bum you out.
Frustrated, unhappy. Let's say you believe you're not creative.
Yeah.
And that's stopping you from pursuing something you're actually passionate about.
A hobby or a career change.
Right. So it's not about questioning every assumption, just the ones that are messing with your mojo. And they give this great example about someone who thought they were bad at math, so they never considered, a whole career field.
Oh, I can so relate to that. I used to think I was terrible at public speaking.
Really?
It held me back from doing so much.
And then what happened?
Well, I finally said, screw it, I'm going to try it. And guess what? I actually enjoy it now. Wild, right?
That's awesome. See, it's amazing how much power those assumptions have over us.
Yeah, until you challenge them.
And then, boom, new possibilities.
Okay, so we found some assumptions we want to challenge. What's next? Do we just yell at them?
Haha, no, not quite. The speaker has a super simple way to test those assumptions. They say, ask yourself, what if the opposite were true?
So in my case, what if I'm actually good at public speaking?
Exactly. And then see where that thought takes you. Explore that possibility. Maybe join a public speaking group or take a class.
Get out of my comfort zone. Experiment.
Yep. You might be surprised what you discover about yourself.
All right, so challenging assumptions check. What's the next takeaway?
This one's juicy. Embracing vulnerability. The speaker actually says that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness.
Well, hold on. We're always told to be strong and confident.
Right. But the thing is, vulnerability is what lets us connect with other people, really connect.
Okay, I'm listening.
When we let our guard down, share our struggles, our imperfections, it gives other people permission to do the same.
Well, it's not about pretending we've got it all figured out.
Exactly. It's about being real, authentic. And the speaker tells this really powerful story about a time when they were going through something rough.
What was it? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was a pretty serious health scare. And they didn't want to tell anyone because, they were afraid of being judged, of seeming weak.
But then they did open up about it.
Yeah, and what they found was that people were totally understanding and supportive.
That's nice.
And by sharing their story, they actually ended up connecting with people who'd been through similar things.
Wow, that's a great example of how vulnerability can actually bring people together.
Totally. And the speaker emphasized that vulnerability isn't just about sharing your struggles. It's also about being open to receiving help.
So it's got to go both ways.
Exactly. Got to be willing to give and receive.
All right, so challenging assumptions, embracing vulnerability. What's the third takeaway?
This one's all about redefining success. The speaker says we got to move past those narrow definitions of success.
You mean money, status, all that?
Yep, those are the big ones. And they can be really limiting.
Yeah, they can make you chase stuff that doesn't even matter.
Totally. And you might end up achieving goals that don't actually make you happy. The speaker's all about finding a definition of success that's personal to you, meaningful.
So what does that look like? How do you do that?
Well, it starts by asking yourself some tough questions like,
Right.
what do you actually value? What brings you joy? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world?
Those are some big questions.
They are, but they're important questions to ask if you want to build a life that feels, fulfilling.
Okay, I'm getting that. But how do you even start to answer those questions?
Well, one thing they suggest is writing a personal mission statement.
With that?
Just a short, clear statement that sums up your core values and, like, your vision for your life.
Like a roadmap.
Exactly. It helps you stay on track even when things get tough. Keeps you focused on what truly matters to you.
Okay, so we've got challenging assumptions, embracing vulnerability, redefining success. What's the final takeaway?
This one's about understanding the ripple effect of change.
Ripple effect.
The speaker emphasizes that our actions, even the small ones, have these ripple effects. They go way beyond us.
What do you mean?
They're saying that changes you make in your life can positively impact the people around you, even the world as a whole. They gave this awesome example in the talk
Ooh, tell me.
about this young woman who started a community garden in her neighborhood. At first, it was just a small thing, but it grew into something much bigger.
That's awesome. I love that.
Right, and it shows how one person's actions can inspire others and create all this positive change.
It's really empowering to think
It
about.
is. And the speaker ends by encouraging us to think about what kind of ripple effect WE want to create in the world.
So it's not just about growing ourselves, it's about using that growth to make a difference.
Exactly. And that's what makes this talk so powerful. It's not just about changing our own lives, it's about changing the world.
Okay, I'm definitely hooked. I want to dive deeper into this.
Let's do it. In part 2, we'll get into the specifics of each of these 4 takeaways and how you can actually apply them to your own life.
Sounds good. Can't wait.
Thinking back to those 4 takeaways from part 1,
Yeah.
what really hit me was how connected they all are. Like, they kind of build on each other.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't really think of it that way, but yeah, now that you mention it,
It's like a roadmap,
to like personal transformation.
Exactly. How can you be vulnerable if you're still hung up on being perfect all the time?
Right, right.
And how can you figure out what success really means to you unless you're willing to be vulnerable enough to admit what you actually care about?
Even if it's like totally different from what everyone else thinks.
Exactly. So it's not just 4 random ideas, it's a process.
The journey, yeah.
And that's what makes this TED Talk so powerful, I think. It's not about quick fixes. It's about real, lasting change.
So let's dive back into that framework. We talked about challenging assumptions in part 1.
Right.
And you mentioned some cool examples from the talk itself. Can you share one?
Yeah, definitely. There's one that stuck with me. The speaker was talking about career paths
Okay.
and how they always thought they had to follow the traditional route.
College, good job, climb the ladder, that whole thing.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
But they felt this pull towards something more creative, more like entrepreneurial.
Did they just ignore it?
Well, they tried to at first, told themselves to be practical, responsible, but the more they pushed it down, the more unhappy they got.
I get that. It's like trying to squeeze yourself into a box that's like the wrong shape.
Yes. And eventually they realized they couldn't keep living that way. They had to challenge that assumption about what their career should look like, even if it meant taking a risk.
So they quit and started their own thing.
Well, not immediately. They started small with some night classes, trying different creative outlets.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But eventually they did take the leap and start their own business, and it's doing amazing now.
Love that. So they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk, you know?
Exactly. And they made this point that it's not always about like making this huge drastic change.
Sometimes it's just about trying something new.
Right. Or having that tough conversation you've been putting off.
Being open to new possibilities.
Exactly. And sometimes those new possibilities can lead you to amazing things.
Okay, so that's challenging assumptions. What about embracing vulnerability? We touched on it in part 1, but I want to hear more about how the speaker actually brought it to life in the talk.
Oh, for sure. They told this story about making a big mistake at work, like a mistake with consequences.
Uh-oh.
And at first, they were totally embarrassed, wanted to hide it.
I want to hide too.
Right. But then they realized that hiding it would just make things worse.
So they fessed up.
Yep. Got their whole team together, explained what happened, took full responsibility.
That takes guts.
It does. And you know what? Instead of getting judged or yelled at, their team was super supportive.
Wow. I think a lot of people would be too scared to do that.
Me too. But the speaker's point was that vulnerability isn't about being weak. It's about being authentic and building trust.
So it's not like airing all your dirty laundry, just being real when it matters.
Right. And they made this interesting point about vulnerability actually being a source of strength.
How so?
When we let people see our flaws, it gives them permission to do the same.
Oh, like it creates a safer space for everyone.
Yeah, a culture of openness. And then you can connect with people on a deeper level.
Okay, so that's challenging assumptions,
Yeah.
embracing vulnerability.
Yeah.
What about redefining success? This is a big one for me, especially these days when everyone's telling you what success should look like.
Totally. And the speaker really pushed back on that. They pointed out how we often define success by external stuff like money or status.
But isn't that what everyone wants?
Maybe, but the speaker's point was when we're only focused on that external stuff, we might end up chasing goals that don't actually make us happy.
So how do we redefine it then? What did they suggest?
They said start by figuring out what you value, what brings you joy, what kind of impact do you want to make, and then line your actions up with those values.
So it's not about some cookie cutter definition of success.
Nope, it's got to be personal. And they told this story about a time when they had achieved all those traditional markers of success.
Big house, fancy car, all that.
Yep, but they weren't happy
Why not?
because they realized they were living someone else's dream. They were so focused on what other people thought, they forgot about themselves.
So what did they do?
Took a step back, asked themselves those tough questions about what they actually wanted.
Yeah.
Turns out their real passion was working with kids. So they left their fancy corporate job and started a nonprofit for underprivileged kids.
Wow, big change.
It was. But they said it was incredibly freeing. They finally felt aligned with their values.
That's inspiring.
It is. And it just shows that success doesn't have to look one specific way.
Okay, so challenging assumptions, embracing vulnerability, redefining success.
Yeah.
What about that last one, the ripple effect?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about how the speaker approached that.
You know, one of the coolest things about this talk is how it emphasizes that personal growth isn't selfish. It's not just about you. It's about making a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in your own little world and forget about that.
Totally. But the speaker reminded us that even small things we do can make a difference. They told this story about a time when they were feeling really down, and a random stranger did something nice for them.
Oh, what happened?
They were at the grocery store having a rough day, feeling overwhelmed, and the person behind them offered to pay for their groceries.
Wow, that's so kind.
Right. And the speaker said that small act totally turned their day around. It was a reminder that even when things are tough, there's still good in the world.
That's beautiful.
And it just shows how connected we all are and how even tiny gestures can have a big impact.
I love that.
And the speaker challenged us to think about what kind of ripple effect we want to create. Do we want to spread kindness, inspire others, make a difference in our communities?
It's powerful to think about. We all have the potential to be agents of change.
Exactly. And it's not about waiting for some big opportunity. It's about making an effort in our everyday lives, being kind in the little moments.
Right, those little things add up.
Exactly. And the speaker left us with this thought. What if we all committed to making one small positive change each day? Imagine the ripple effect that would create.
Whoa, chills.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've revisited the 4 takeaways, but before we jump into part 3, can you tell me a bit more about the speaker themselves? What made them so engaging?
Absolutely. I think it was their authenticity, They felt like they were speaking from the heart, sharing their own stories in a way that felt really relatable.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that they weren't afraid to talk about their own struggles. That definitely makes them more human.
Totally. And they also had this great sense of humor. They weren't afraid to make jokes, even at their own expense. It kept things light and fun.
So it felt more like a conversation than a lecture.
Exactly. And they used these vivid images and metaphors that really brought their ideas to life. You could picture exactly what they were talking about.
Okay, authenticity, humor, vivid imagery, anything else.
Their passion. You could tell they were so passionate about what they were talking about, and it was contagious.
It made you want to lean in and listen.
Exactly. And I think that's a big part of why this TED Talk has resonated with so many people. It's not just informative, it's inspiring.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. So before we wrap up part 2, I want to hear from our listeners. What resonated most with you? Was there a story or a point that really hit home? Did anything challenge your own assumptions or get you thinking in a new way?
That's a great question. And remember, everyone will take away something different from this talk. What matters to you might not matter to someone else, and that's totally fine. The important thing is to be open to the ideas and see how they fit into your life.
Good point. We all come to this with our own experiences.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this talk so powerful. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a framework that each person can adapt to their own situation.
Okay, so as we wrap up part 2, I want to leave you with this question. If you could choose one of these 4 takeaways to focus on right now, which one would it be and why? What part of your life could use a little shakeup? What assumption could you challenge? What vulnerability could you embrace?
Think about that as we head into part 3. We'll be diving even deeper into each takeaway and looking at specific ways to actually implement them in your life.
Sounds good. Can't wait to get into it. All right, back for 4-3 of our deep dive, and I'm ready to get practical.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's one thing to understand these ideas, but actually putting them into practice.
That's the real challenge.
Totally. So let's go through those 4 takeaways again, but this time with action steps.
Love it.
First up, challenging assumptions. We talked about finding those beliefs that might be holding us back. But then what? How do we actually challenge them?
Well, the speaker talked about this technique called cognitive reframing.
Cognitive what now?
It's basically just looking at the situation from a different angle.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say you think you're bad at public speaking.
Oh, that's me. Still get those butterflies.
So instead of focusing on that negative thought, you try to find evidence that contradicts it.
Like a time when I actually did a good presentation.
Exactly. Or maybe you think about all the times you've shared your ideas confidently, even in smaller groups.
Shifting the focus to the positive.
Yep. Look for evidence that supports a more empowering belief.
So instead of I'm terrible at public speaking, it's more like, hey, I've done this before, and I can learn and get better.
That's it. And the more you practice reframing those thoughts, the more you start to believe it.
It's like brain training.
Totally. And it takes time, like any new skill.
All right, so that's cognitive reframing for challenging assumptions. What about embracing vulnerability? Sharing our struggles can be scary. Any tips for making it less intimidating?
Start small. You don't have to bare your soul to the whole world right away.
Baby steps.
Exactly. Maybe confide in a close friend first, someone you trust.
Dipping your toes in the water.
Yep. And the speaker also said, choose your audience wisely. You don't have to be vulnerable with everyone.
Right. Got to be strategic about it.
And remember, it's not a weakness. It takes guts to be vulnerable.
Okay, so cognitive reframing for challenging assumptions, starting small, and choosing your audience wisely for vulnerability. What about redefining success? Defining success on our own WN terms sounds great, but how do we even start doing that?
The speaker had this awesome exercise. Imagine it's your 80th birthday.
Okay.
You're surrounded by loved ones. What do you want them to say about you? What kind of legacy do you want to leave?
Wow, that's deep.
It is. It makes you think beyond money and stuff and focus on what truly matters.
Do you want to be remembered for your kindness?
Yeah.
Your creativity, the impact you made?
Exactly. And the speaker pointed out that this isn't a one-time thing.
It's an ongoing process.
Right. As you grow, your definition of success might evolve too.
So check in with yourself regularly. Make sure you're still on track, still pursuing what brings you joy.
Exactly. And be open to new possibilities. Things change, and that's okay.
Okay, so we've got cognitive reframing for challenging assumptions, starting small, and choosing your audience for embracing vulnerability, picturing our 80th birthday for redefining success. And finally, understanding the ripple effect of change. How do we make sure our actions are actually creating the kind of change we want to see?
Great question. The speaker said, be mindful of your intentions. Like, why are you doing this? For yourself, for others, or both?
Know your why.
Yep. And be consistent. One nice thing isn't going to create a ripple effect. It takes ongoing effort.
Make it a habit, not a one-time thing.
Exactly. And lead by example. When you live with integrity and compassion, you inspire others to do the same.
Actions speak louder than words.
Totally. The speaker had this beautiful image of a pond, perfectly still. Then someone throws a pebble in, and these ripples spread out, touching everything.
Our actions are the pebbles.
Exactly. And they can create ripples of change that reach far beyond us.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, feeling super inspired now. This TED Talk has given me so much to think about.
Me too. And I hope our listeners are feeling the same way. It's a real gem full of wisdom and practical advice for creating positive change.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, one final thought for everyone. If you could make one small change today, inspired by this talk, what would it be? What kind of ripple would you create?
Let that question be your guide as you move forward. Remember, even the smallest pebble can make a big splash.